This week on Quality Digest Live, is being lazy the key to lean improvement?
What are you saying? Plus, I'll look at the various shapes and sizes of leadership. That and more when we come back.
Welcome back to Quality Digest Live for December 4th, 2015. QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making the news in the world of quality. I'm Mike Richmond, publisher of Quality Digest.
And I'm Quality Digest Editor-in-Chief, Dirk Ducharme. Okay, once again, strap your geek hat on. Something quite big, there you go, is about to happen in metrology. And that is, pretty soon, by 2018, if all goes according to plan, all units of measure will be based on physical constants. Currently, if I understand this right, of the 7 physical constants that form the basis of SI units, and that's the ampere, candela, Kelvin, kilogram, meter, mole, and second, only the kilogram still has a physical artifact as its standard. This is a 1 kilogram platinum iridium bar kept in a vault in Paris. The issue, though, is that the kilogram factors into other base units, such as the mole, the ampere, and the candela. So the fact that the kilogram is based on a physical artifact that changes over time, by the way, it means that that affects also the mole, the ampere, and the candela. So the kilogram has kind of been throwing a wrench in the works, so to speak. So basing the kilogram on a physical constant rather than an artifact that, as I said, is changing over time, will, number one, advance the goal of basing all measurements on physical constants, and B, improve the accuracy and stability of all such measurements going forward. So the big news for the measurement geeks out there is that the plan is by 2018, what they're calling new SI will be released that defines the kilogram, Kelvin, ampere, and mole in terms of the Planck constant, the Boltzmann constant, the charge of the electron, and the Avogadro constant, all of which are physical constants. Now, these values would be fixed at the most accurate variables obtainable at the time of the redefinition of the SI standards, meaning that even though these are physical constants, we still need to measure them somehow with man-made equipment, and that takes very sophisticated equipment, which of course have their own accuracy and repeatability specs. The General Conference on Weights and Measures, this is the diplomatic body that has authority under the meter convention to oversee this change, has placed strict preconditions and technical requirements for agreement and uncertainties in those measurements that I just spoke of. So, for example, the CGPM calls for determinations of the Planck constant, which is used to redefine the kilogram, to have relative uncertainties of 20 parts per billion and be consistent between 2 physically different methods of measurement. Now, not places of measurement. We're not talking about 2 different countries or 2 different labs doing the same measurement with the same equipment. They really have to verify with each other using 2 different methods of measurement within 20 parts per billion. So thanks to scientists in NIST Physical Measurement Laboratory, the PML, to refit NIST workhorse watt balance, which we covered last year, the latest values for the Planck constant have a combined relative uncertainty of 12 parts per billion. So about half is what's required. They're requiring 20 parts per billion. The new watt balance is down to 12 parts per billion, and this is the most important part, is consistent among 3 different labs in 3 countries. The 2014 values also include a determination of the Boltzmann constant, which is used to define Kelvin, that substantially exceeds CGPM's relative uncertainty criteria. So the stage has been set that all this new SI, as we're going to call it, can happen in 2018. So it is kind of big news for the metrology world because right now so much is based on let's say, the kilogram, and the kilogram we know is changing over time. And also there's been some improvements in measurements of other types in terms, even the physical constants, just the equipment to measure the physical constants. We mentioned the watt balance there. That equipment has gotten so much better that they're actually able to make these measurements more precisely, which just means the standards are more precise, more repeatable, more accurate. So,
I mean, for those of us that don't do this for a living, I mean, it can seem rather arcane. I mean,
You're right, exactly.
When you say that the kilogram is changing over time, I mean,
the amount
infinitesimal,
right,
infinitesimal changes. But yet, where we are in science and where we are in accuracy today, that matters.
It matters. Yes, exactly.
And having these physical constants,
Yeah.
That enable more accuracy and to have more uniformity at different labs across the world, as you say, is really going to help metrologists do their work better. And it is important. It's important stuff, even though for some of us it can seem arcane. It's really, really important.
And science and industry all depend on those measurements. So they got to be good.
Very much so. Thanks, Dirk. All right. Also in the news this week, the Gallup organization reports that when it comes to success in the business-to-business arena, building great relationships is more important than gathering and crunching mountains of data. And that's the key takeaway from an article titled "More Data Don't Always Mean Better Insights," which recently appeared in the Gallup Business Journal. And we republished the piece in Monday's issue of Quality Digest Daily a few days ago. Gallup accumulated this information through thousands and thousands of interviews with B2B customers, and they found that those organizations that do the best are those that provide value by deeply engaging their customers. Although data analysis can yield insights into customer behaviors and preferences, it's no substitute for the personal element of working together with customers to find ways to succeed together. The best path is to really combine the qualitative data analysis with quantitative questioning. In other words, you do have this mountain of data that you can access in terms of your customers and their behaviors, but you can meld that together with some qualitative questioning, and you can kind of ask about, why is that? And you can find out what they're really wanting to do, and you can build the relationships through that. And that's really the important thing that Gallup is talking about here. Now, there are really some eye-popping benefits to proper relationship building, and it's borne out by Gallup's findings. For example, 82% of B2B customers are fully engaged with brands that they find it easy to do business with, compared to 17% who are indifferent and 1% who are actively disengaged. Now, you might say, and I did when I read that, there might be a chicken and egg relationship here, right? I mean, do the customers find the company easy to work with because they're engaged with the brand, or do they grow engaged because the company makes the relationship easy to work with, right? Is it an easy relationship to work? Well, in the end, I don't think it really matters. The key takeaway is that if you treat your customer right, if you ask them the proper questions, and if you help them solve their most pressing problems in partnership, they're going to want to work with you. I mean, they're really going to want to work with you. And that attitude of partnership is ultimately going to mean a lot more and help you win a lot more business in the B2B arena than any data analysis by itself. And I can vouch for that. I mean, I think that, I find in dealing with customers that data is important. You can't not provide data, and you can't not understand what the voice of the customer data is telling you. But there's no substitute for having a conversation, a relationship with a customer and saying, well, let's cut through all that. I mean, I see what is going on here, and the data is telling me this. What's your issue? And how can we help you? And how can we partner with you to help you solve your problems? And that's what customer relationship building is all about. That's what the Gallup survey is really saying, is that you got to do both, but of the two, building the relationship is how you engage your customers and how you win more business.
Right, and I think transparency with the data, good or bad. I think we have found, as a company ourselves and with companies that we deal with, that even if the data isn't as rosy as you would like, if you're transparent with it, and it's like, okay, what can we do together as partners to make this data better? What service can we provide to make it better, or advising them on what they might do that might help the data be better, that they're willing to overlook a certain amount of bad data if you can work together to improve it. And that's the relationship half of it.
That's exactly right. Very, very important stuff. And you can do really well if you bear that in mind. And that's what Gallup is saying right there.
Okay. This next story, I don't know. The editors assigned me a story called "The Lazy Lean Guy" by Bruce Hamilton.
You are pretty lean, I must say. You're not at all overweight. So half of that is true.
So half of that's true. As I said, the story was called "The Lazy Lean Guy" by Bruce Hamilton. Bruce Hamilton, in the story, tells of how he was warned with a company that he first came to work with. He was warned to watch for this one assembler because this guy bends the rules. So Bruce went out and he started watching this guy just to see, well, what was he warned about? What are they talking about? This guy bends the rules. So he's watching this guy, and the first thing he noticed is that he doesn't organize his workstation like everybody else organizes his workstation, and he doesn't do his job the same way. It's an assembly job, and with an assembly job, there's typically, fold, tab A into slot B, and you do things in a certain order, and this guy wasn't doing it that way, right? So Bruce goes up and he asks the guy, he said, "So what are you doing?" And the guy says, "Well, basically, I'm lazy.
Yeah.
I want to do things easier. I want to have my workspace laid out so everything is where I can get to it, not like that guy over there." He says, and by the way, the way we're assembling this product, no, it's all wrong. There's an easier way to do this. I want to do it that way because I'm lazy.
Yeah.
And managers didn't like that because, if you're a manager, you've got processes and procedures, and this is the way you do it. And the fact that it was easier for this guy didn't matter. Right? I mean,
well, but it's this term lazy, right? I mean, and the guy self-proclaimed himself as that, right?
Yeah,
and it wasn't just that. It wasn't his laziness that the managers warned Bruce about. It was this idea that the guy was kind of rebellious, right? But in TPS, in the Toyota Production System, this very principle is actually really honored. The idea that a worker is going to find a better way to do something is a core principle of TPS, of lean, is that, we don't have all the answers as management. We're going to maybe dictate a certain process or procedure, but while you're doing it, while you're in the procedure of doing it, you may find that it's easier to have the tool here rather than here. So if the tool's easier here because you're right-handed or whatever the case may be, the managers will look at that and say, well, wait a minute, maybe we need to make this a plant-wide or a company-wide change because it's going to be much more efficient. So that feedback is honored. But in American companies, what Bruce is saying, it wasn't honored. The guy was considered a troublemaker.
Oh, that's interesting. It's interesting you bring that up because actually Bruce had let me see if I can find it here. Bruce mentioned, Shigeo Shingo in his book, Non-Stock Production, said that the order of improvement must be easier, better, faster, and then cheaper. In that order. He was adamant, easier comes
fast.
first. Easier, better, faster. Those got to come first. And in our culture, we're so used to, and look, there's a lot of sense to having procedures and process and procedure and do things the same way every time. But what you also need to have in place is the means to change that if there's a need to. So if this guy has found an easier way to do something, and it's just as fast or faster, and the product quality and the reject rate stays the same or gets better, then why wouldn't you want to do it easier?
Right.
Why make life hard for? I think it was Taiichi Ono. Why make your workers sweat when they don't have to?
Yeah. Well, but it again, I think it's a cultural thing. I mean, in America, we want to see the effort, right? I mean, and many times
if you're not sweating, you aren't working.
Right. I mean, it doesn't have, but it doesn't have to be painful. I think Bruce says that in his piece too. It doesn't have to hurt. It doesn't have to be a painful process. And many times, I think that managers and workers themselves believe that in the absence of efficiency, I have to show that I'm really struggling with this. I'm working hard. I'm earning my pay.
Right. Or you slow down.
Or you slow down.
You find a much more efficient way to do something, and you're finding yourself with some spare time. So I don't want to look like I'm doing nothing, so I'm going to do some busy work. Or I'm just going to work slower. Well, what's the good in that for the company, right?
That's right. I mean, the idea is to have throughput. I mean, to have flow and throughput. And if somebody can come up with an idea, even if they're a troublemaker, I mean, the people that come up with these ideas tend to be a certain type, let's say, a certain personality type. I mean, they don't want to follow rules. I mean, hey, when I was a kid, I always had a problem with the show your work in the math area. It's like, I got the answer right. Who cares?
Who cares?
I mean, but there's this idea that it comes from schooling, right? This idea that follow orders, do it the way everybody else does it, and you be a good pat on the head, and maybe you get a raise or a promotion or whatever. But that doesn't suit the broader realities and doesn't suit the broader purposes of the organization, right? You want to improve.
Right, and so I think you have to have, like you said, you have to have a process in place. Number one, you've got to recognize when an employee has found an easier or better way to do something. There's got to be a free and easy way for them to communicate that without being punished. And the idea may be a good idea or a bad idea, but at least there's got to be a way to put it forward.
Right.
And there has to be a process in place to then roll out that change. Because it's a big deal. I mean, you make a change in a procedure, now you have to go through, you have to update all the procedures. There's a whole, the whole document control part of it, and it has to be rolled out. So it's a big deal, but just because it's a big deal doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, and you should have a process in place to actually do it.
Yeah,
so.
and that's what Bruce is saying here in this article. Really good. Bruce, I always like Bruce because he is a lean guy. And he is a lazy guy, I think, too. But he has a good perspective on this stuff. He's been doing it for a long time, and we always like running his stuff from Bruce Hamilton. All right. Thanks, Derek. All right. Well, we ran a short, but I think a pretty meaty article this week titled "Leadership in All Shapes and Sizes" from John Bell. And the premise of this piece is a simple one, namely that everyone can be a leader, even if that person doesn't manage anyone at all. As Bell writes, one direct report doesn't make you a leader, nor does 10. That's good, wise advice there. He goes on to write about people that are essentially working on their own every day who exhibit leadership skills. These people are like pilots or taxi drivers, right? Teachers, people that are interacting really on their own, and they need to do their work, right? They need to show leadership. They need to show initiative, and they don't need to be a leader. The problem comes when we confuse craft with career, and Bell writes about this very clearly. In fact, we can have both, he says, but the joy and the skill that we bring to our work is often diluted by the desire to get ahead and advance. The result is that great individual workers in large organizations are sometimes pushed into management positions for which I think they're pretty ill-suited.
And he had a good example of that. I'm not sure if you were going to bring that, but he had an example of a guy who was really good at his job, but the guy had his mindset as, I got to move up the ladder, I got to move up the ladder.
Right.
But he wasn't a leader.
For it.
He wasn't suited for it.
He wasn't suited for that, but he was a leader within himself. He was a leader in terms of modeling the right behaviors for the job he did.
And he was good at his job.
And he was very good at his job, and they gave him training. They did everything to make him as good as he could be at what he did really well, rather than kind of force him into a square peg that maybe he wasn't going to fit in. Now, it's actually interesting because the other example that I thought about when I read this was Bruce Hamilton's story that he just talked about right there, that you just reported on, right?
Yeah.
The lean, lazy guy, that brilliant guy that Bruce Hamilton met a few decades ago, I'm sure, I don't know, but I'm sure he never made it into management, right? I mean, he was too much of an independent thinker, yet his ideas were worth emulating, right? And in that sense, he had the potential, whether it was the actual potential or the realized potential, to lead people around him in finding better ways to do things. In other words, he was able to emulate behaviors and come up with behaviors that really worked and made the organization better. That's a leader, whether or not anyone reports to him or not, right? That guy is a leader. Now, the way it's done now, however, I think it continues the classic organizational failure, which is known as the Peter principle, right? Essentially, that people are promoted until they reach their limit of ability, meaning that basically everyone in large organizations are doing a job that they're incompetent at. Now, I don't know if it's really that bad, but this article kind of throws the Peter principle on its head by saying that promotion is not and should not be the be-all and end-all of one's profession. Again, he's talking about craft versus a profession, right? I mean, he's talking about your career versus craft. And I mean, the Peter principle says, and this is like 40 years old.
Right, no, it's really old,
almost 50 years old, is that, basically everybody gets promoted because you proved you can do a job, and then you go to the next job, a little higher up, and then you keep going until you can't get promoted anymore. You can no longer handle it.
Yes, because you stop because now you're doing your job poorly.
And then so it's like,
as opposed to staying where you were doing a job
really well, and it's like, wait a minute. I mean, all that does is it just puts people into a place where they can't do the work and they don't help the organization, but they get raises, they get better benefits, they get things, and I think that's what Bell's talking about here, is this idea that leaders of all shapes and sizes, you have to be satisfied, you have to understand what you're really good at, take a little self-critique, and do it well to the best of your ability.
Well, and also I think you need to be, and this is the important part, is I think people do allow themselves to be moved up the ladder, even if it's into a job they don't like, because of the incentives for it, the perks that go with a better raise. So really it should be the other way around. You should be paid and get really good benefits for doing your job well.
Really well.
Exactly.
I mean, that's a good point.
And stay there.
Yeah. I mean, we've all seen it happen, though. I mean, we've seen people that are aggressive and that they want to get on a management track, and they come into an organization many times, and they're young, and they learn a few things in the job they're in, but their eye's always on the next job. Their eye's always on their boss's job or their boss's job, and they're always thinking in those terms. So you're not present with your present job. And, I mean, within a continuous improvement culture, you got to be really present to look at the issues that are surrounding your daily work, your leader standard work if you're a leader. And if you can't do that, if your eye is on what somebody else is doing or what you want to be doing instead, you're not going to improve yourself or your organization. And that's really a downside to that career path advancement. Yet, it's very deeply ingrained. I think all of us come into a large organization thinking about where we can go from there.
Right.
Either within the organization or what can I get out of the organization in training or skills or knowledge and go somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, so I mean, it would take a real, I think, and maybe there's companies that work this way, but it seems like it would take a real rejiggering of how a company works just to say, look, just because you advance up the ladder doesn't mean you're going to get more money. We're going to compensate you based on how well you do your job, your interest in it, what kind of performance you have there. If you want more schooling, we're going to pay for that. Yep. And hey, by the way, if something up the ladder does look interesting to you and you are interested in doing it and you're skilled enough for it, well, we'll move you there too, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get a raise. Right. In other words, your compensation shouldn't necessarily be based on what level of the company you're in.
But merit.
But merit.
And you know what this
boy, that opens up a whole other can of worms.
Yeah, but you know what it also touches on was interesting, as you were mentioning that, is it touches on something that Kelly Graves talked about a couple of weeks ago on the show, this idea of performance reviews. And are we doing performance reviews in the right way? I mean, performance reviews really now are looked at by both the reviewer and the reviewee as a step on the path to promotion, right? So that annual deal is like, all right, well, where am I in my career path now? Am I closer to getting that promotion? Am I not going to, that's like the subtext of it. Yet it feeds into this whole idea that that's the goal rather than to give that 360-degree review on like a daily basis, on a real-time basis to improve what you're doing right now, what your boss is doing right now, rather than saying, okay, every year we're going to sit down, we're going to look how you're doing, and maybe you can get a promotion from that at some point. It's a very different mindset.
Yeah, I mean, it should work. I mean, I think about this, more and more I just keep thinking that in some ways a company should work the way things work in real life. I mean, if you're doing a job, if you have a hobby, right? And you're working at your hobby, whatever that is, and somebody comes along and notices, hey, there's an easier way for you to do that, there's a faster way for you to do that, so on and so forth. Basically, they're critiquing you. They're saying, you're not doing that as well as you can. Here's a way to do it better. Mm-hmm. To me, that's the way almost a job should work as well. And so that is kind of your performance review. The boss comes by, he sees how you're doing. Hey, look, Dirk, there's an easier way. I'd like you to try doing it this way. I think you're going to have much better luck with it. By the way, if you need some more training, we'll give that to you. And gives you a chance also, hey, thanks, boss. By the way, I appreciate that you approached me one-on-one and didn't calm me down. You're getting this feedback, right? And so you have this whole conversation going on, which is really the way things work outside of work. That's the way we deal in a real life, but somehow we come into work and it's all very structured and it works this way and you get a performance review every 6 months or every year and it's, and that's not the way life works. No. And honestly, it doesn't work. Or it doesn't work as well as it should. Anyway.
Work doesn't work. Yeah,
work doesn't work.
In that way, yeah. I think I agree with you. Yep.
All right. Good stuff by John Bell. Okay, exactly 1 year ago today, December 4th, 2014, we ran an article by Gary Minks of TÜV Süd regarding the Medical Device Single Audit Program. That's the MDSAP. This is a program whose objective is to develop, manage, and oversee a single audit program that will allow a single regulatory audit of a medical device manufacturer conducted by an MDSAP recognized auditing organization. This audit would satisfy the needs of multiple regulatory jurisdictions. The idea behind MDSAP is one audit accepted anywhere within the countries that are covered by MDSAP, and I think Brazil, Japan, Canada, Australia, a couple others. It's not the entire world, but major markets. Mm-hmm. This is it sounds a strange idea, but this is actually particularly important for medical device manufacturers since the process of being audited for a medical device is expensive and time-consuming, and having duplicate pre- and post-market audits can become an expensive proposition for manufacturers, and it can slow down the introduction of new medical devices around the world. So in an article we ran this week, yesterday I think, according to an August 2015 mid-pilot status report, the MDSAP is still in a pilot stage. The mid-pilot status report briefly covered in the article, the Medical Device Single Audit Program, said that the study is making progress in achieving the objectives and performance goals required to launch the operational phase of MDSAP on January 1st, 2017. The audit results under the pilot study are being evaluated against 8 specific proof of concept criteria, and you can read about what those criteria are in the article. The article points out at the very end that the ultimate success of the study and the operational MDSAP program depend on increased participation by medical device manufacturers. And that is conceivably, according to the people we've talked to, a potentially tough nut to crack. The MDSAP is a very comprehensive program. It could be expensive. More than likely will be expensive. So it might be attractive to large companies, maybe not to small companies, unless there's been some changes to how the MDSAP is going to work. So right now they're trying the organizers behind the MDSAT and the registrars are trying to encourage people to at least look at it and look at that as an option for medical device registration certification. Whether they get more buy-in on this or not is kind of up in the air. That's the big question right now. It is a voluntary program, so you don't have to do it. Big companies more than likely will jump on board with it. The small ones, that remains to be seen. We are actually going to be having a webinar on this that we're doing with, oddly enough, TÜV-SÜD. The webinar is called Medical Device Single Audit Program, One Audit for Multiple Market Access, and that will be next Tuesday, December 8th at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. If you attend that, you should learn a little bit more of what the MDSAP is all about and what it could mean to you if you're a medical device manufacturer.
That's right. Really important there, I think, for people that are in that space. And yeah, you saw the website, the webinar information there. Also, keep an eye on your inbox, your email inbox as usual. You can register for that webinar via the email we'll send you on Monday. And of course, in the article, there's also a link out to the webinar registration page there.
Correct. Yes, there is.
You can register that way as well. All right.
Before we go, there was an interesting article, and we'll just be really brief about it. Really interesting article we came across this week. I guess the Chinese, along with the South Koreans, are launching a major cloning operation where they're cloning, I believe it's cloning cow embryos, so that you can basically going to be growing cloned cattle in order to meet what they're expecting to be 5% of their 5% of their beef needs in China, right? Using cloned cattle. Now, we don't need to get into the idea, eating cloned beef or cloned anything or food from cloned anything or GMOs or Soylent Green or whatever. Soylent Green. If you don't understand that reference, you got to look up the movie.
You had to go there.
Soylent Green is people.
Yeah.
But actually, the interesting part of me, for me about this, regardless of the implications of all that stuff, is that there is an ooh factor for a lot of people. They go, ooh, eating cloned animals, ooh, eating food from cloned animals. So as a developer of technology, do you pay attention to that?
Right.
Do you move ahead developing a product or a technology when you know a large part of your audience is going to go, I don't know if I want to eat that, or do you go, we're gonna dump a lot of money into it, and you'll get used to it. And I mean, I think as a developer, it's kind of a weird question. It's not like I'm worried about the technology will take off. I'm worried about people will have revulsion toward my product, which is a weird thing.
And it is a product, and that's the thing.
It is a product,
it is packaged, it is marketed in a certain way. I think that we're seeing it here in the United States with GMO, and we're seeing it with the natural label, and it's a big question. It's actually probably more of a question we can jump in on right now, but it's one, I'm glad you planted that seed because we're going to revisit it and talk about it some more, I think, in an upcoming show. There's so many facets to that question, but it is a marketing issue, I think, in my mind, more than anything else.
Try it. I know you're disgusted by it, but you'll like it.
You'll like it eventually.
You'll like it eventually.
Let's try it. All right. Thanks, Dirk. All right, we're going to close the show now, as we sometimes do, with our tweet of the week. And this one comes to us from a little-known physicist of the last century by the name of Albert Einstein. If you don't know who he is, you can look him up on Wikipedia. Anyway, the quote is provided by Twitter user Dr. Diego Conan, who also references Dr. W. Edwards Deming's admonition that you can't measure what you can't see. The relevant quote from Einstein, as you can see right there, is, "Not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted." Wise words from that obscure Austrian scientist. Whatever happened to that guy anyway?
I don't know.
Did he ever make anything of himself?
No.
He never just got lost in the vapors of
Yeah,
history.
that's right.
Albert Einstein. I got to Wikipedia that guy. Anyway, all right. Well, in any event, for more wise tweets on quality management, standards, and other things that count, be sure to check us out on Twitter at Quality Digest.
All right. Okay, so that is the end of today's show. And remember, if you are a medical device manufacturer and you sell your products all over the world, you might be interested in the webinar coming up, Medical Device Single Audit Program, One Audit for Multiple Market Access, coming next Tuesday, December 8th at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. There is a link. If you go out to the article underneath the player page and follow that out, there's a link at the bottom that will take you to the webinar and you can sign up.
That's right.
Go ahead and watch it.
All right.
So thanks for joining us today. We hope you have an awesome weekend and we will see you next week.
That's right. Have a great weekend. See you
So
later.
long.